In 2021, 59-year-old Francois Verov was living in La Grande Motte on the southern coast of France. That September 27th, he told his wife he was going to a vacation rental property they owned in Grauduroy to check in new tenants. He kissed her goodbye and left home on his bicycle. He never returned. His wife checked his computer and found that no one had rented the property. She reported him missing, and he would not be found for 2 days. On September 29th, his body was found in the rental property, along with 2 notes. One note stated that his death was a suicide and requested that he not be resuscitated in the event his attempt at taking his own life failed, and he instead went into a coma. In the other, Verov admitted to committing terrible crimes and killing innocent people. A DNA test conducted using a sample taken from his body revealed that Verov was the infamous serial killer Le Grêlé, who had remained unidentified for 35 years. Le Grêlé was believed to have committed 3, perhaps 4 murders and 6 rapes between 1986 and 1994. His first known murder was the 1986 murder of Cécile Bloch. 11-year-old Cécile lived with her parents and her older half-brother in the 19th district of Paris. She was an accomplished student and talented violin player who had played with a youth orchestra for several years. She was planning to transfer to a specialized school at the beginning of 1987 that would allow her to continue her studies while also attending conservatory. Monday, May 5th, 1986, started out as an ordinary day at the family's apartment. Cécile's parents left for work at 8:10, and her half-brother Luc, who was doing advanced studies in biology at the time, left 5 minutes later. Cécile would leave for her morning classes at 8:40. Cécile's routine was to return home for lunch at noon before returning to school. Her mother, Suzanne, would call home to check on her. On May 5th, however, Cécile did not answer the phone as usual. Suzanne waited a few minutes before making a second call, which also went unanswered. She then called Cécile's school and learned that her daughter had never made it to class that morning. Both of Cécile's parents then rushed home to look for Cécile. When they arrived, Cécile was not there, but her school bag was not either, meaning that she left for class but did not arrive there for some reason. Cécile's parents enlisted the help of one of the building's caretakers to search for her. Around 3 p.m., the caretaker was searching a utility room on the 3rd level of the basement when he discovered Cécile's body underneath a piece of discarded carpet. Cécile had been raped, strangled, and stabbed once. Her body was also marked by scratches and bruises, indicating how fiercely Cécile had fought against her killer. Police quickly had a potential suspect for the horrific crime. Several witnesses, including Cécile's parents and her half-brother Luc, saw an unfamiliar man in the building, both on the elevator and in the parking lot, 1 level above where Cécile's body would later be found, between 7:50 and 9:20 that morning. Luc in particular got a good look at this man, and had reason to remember him. That morning, he rode the elevator with the stranger as he headed out for the day. He remembered him not only because he did not recognize him from the building, but also because he was unusually friendly for someone he did not know. Luc assumed the man was just visiting someone else in the building, and therefore thought it was unusual when the stranger told him that he hoped he had a very, very good day as Luc exited the elevator. Luc described the unknown man as being between 25 and 30 years old and just under 6 feet tall. He also reported that the stranger's face had very textured skin, either from pockmarks or acne scars. This detail would lead to the moniker the killer would be given while his identity remained unknown, Le Grêlé, or the pockmarked man. A composite of the suspect was generated, but did not lead to the identification of Cécile's killer. Her case was closed and reopened several times, with numerous individuals re-examining the details of the case, but Cécile's family remained frustrated with the progress of the investigation. After completing his studies, Luc became a geneticist and pushed for authorities in France to use DNA technology in his half-sister's case, as authorities in the United Kingdom and Belgium had begun doing in some of their investigations. It would take years, but eventually, semen found on Cécile's body was submitted for DNA testing, and a profile was developed. This profile would ultimately link the pockmarked man to 3 other rapes and 2 other murders. The first crime DNA tied him to was the rape of an 8-year-old girl called Sarah, which occurred the month before Cécile was killed. Sarah entered the elevator in her apartment building on the morning of April 7, 1986. A man was already inside of the elevator and pretended to press the button for the first floor for her. Instead, the elevator went down to the 4th level of the basement, where the man pushed her out of the elevator. He pulled her over to a mattress and punched her twice as she struggled to get away. He stuffed a rag in her mouth, raped her, strangled her, and left her for dead. Luckily, she was only rendered unconscious and woke up approximately 15 minutes later after her attacker had fled. The same DNA was also found at a double murder which occurred shortly before the first anniversary of Cécile's murder. 20-year-old Irmgard Müller was from Germany, but was living in Paris, working as an au pair, and studying geography. Her employers were 38-year-old Cécile Bloch and his wife. Gilles was an airline mechanic who worked nights, while his wife worked during the day. On April 29, 1987, Irmgard, who lived in a maid's apartment not far from the Bloch family's apartment, arrived to take their daughter to school at 8:45 a.m. Mrs. Bloch then left for work. Her husband had not yet returned home from his overnight shift at work. She would not see him again until 7 o'clock that evening, when she would discover his body when she returned home. Gilles' body was in a position called a Spanish tourniquet by the authorities. He was on his stomach, with his arms behind his back. His arms, legs, and neck were all connected with various ties and pieces of fabric from within the apartment. The various pieces were tightened with a poker from the fireplace, and he would have suffocated slowly. Mrs. Bloch then found Irmgard's body in her daughter's room. Irmgard was mostly nude and tied up to the bunk bed in the room. She had been strangled with the tie from a bathrobe, and her throat had been cut. Both Gilles and Irmgard's bodies had been burned with cigarettes and showed superficial knife wounds, indicating that they had been tortured. The Bloch's daughter was thankfully not at the apartment. The parents of one of her friends had taken her home with them when Irmgard failed to pick her up at school. DNA would be found inside Irmgard and on a cigarette butt found inside the apartment. Both samples matched the DNA from Cécile and Sarah's crime scenes. 2 cameras were stolen from the apartment, and Polaroid paper found at the scene indicated the killer may have photographed his crime. It is possible that Irmgard actually knew her killer. A man was seen at her residence the day before and the day of her murder, and was seen having a heated discussion with her. According to witnesses, he had severe acne scars, raising the possibility that he was the pockmarked man. If this is the case, it means these 2 murders could have had a different motive than Cécile's murder and Sarah's rape. The next crime tied to the pockmarked man through his DNA occurred on October 27, 1987. A 14-year-old named Marianne returned to the apartment building where she lived with her mother from school for her lunch break. A man followed her into the elevator and told her he was a police officer and needed to see her identity documents. He showed her he had a gun in a holster under his jacket and demanded to see her arms to check them for track marks, claiming he was investigating drug trafficking. He continued making threats against her and asking her questions about her mother and her schedule. Now knowing she would not be at home, he forced Marianne inside her apartment and tied her up, threatening her with a letter opener while asking about valuables in the home. He gathered 2 cameras, a VCR, a CD player, and 14 CDs into a bag, before coming back to Marianne and raping her. The man tried to wipe his semen off of Marianne's body, but some of it would be found on the bedding. In 1997, a DNA profile was developed from it and found to be a match to the pockmarked man. The final crime where the pockmarked man's DNA was identified occurred in 1994. Unlike his other crimes, it did not occur in Paris, instead beginning in Mitry-Mory and concluding in Saclay. On June 29th, an 11-year-old called Ingrid took a shortcut as she rode her bicycle home after playing with her friends. As she rode down an isolated dirt road, a car pulled up in front of her and blocked her path. The driver exited the car and told Ingrid that he was a policeman, briefly flashing a tricolor card, a type of identification card issued to law enforcement officers, to her. He told Ingrid that she was not allowed to be riding her bike on that road and asked her for her identification documents. She did not have them with her, So he told her he would have to take her to the police station. The man handcuffed Ingrid and put her in his car, refusing to let her stop at home to tell her family where she was going. Instead of taking her to the police station, the man drove to Cécile, more than 60 kilometers away. He took Ingrid into an abandoned farmhouse, where he raped her. Ingrid spoke to him the entire time, a fact to which she would later attribute her survival. Her attacker again wiped away his semen from her body. He did not have a chance to dispose of the tissue, however, because he left Ingrid at the farmhouse, telling her he was going to get food but would be right back. Ingrid was able to escape during his absence and came across a class from a local motorcycle school. The instructor took her to the gendarmerie in Orsay, and evidence from the farmhouse was quickly collected. In addition to the crimes with DNA evidence, the pockmarked man is also suspected in other crimes based on the circumstances surrounding them. In 2015, police software that analyzes the elements of various crimes led to the pockmarked man also being suspected in the murder of Karine Leroy, who disappeared in Meaux while walking to school on June 9, 1994, 10 days before her 20th birthday. Her body was discovered near the edge of a forest by people out on a walk on July 12th. While DNA evidence has not been found tying her death to the pockmarked man, her body was found bound in the same distinctive manner as Gilles Politi. Karine also disappeared just 20 days before Ingrid was kidnapped and, like in Ingrid's case, also disappeared from outside of Paris, where the pockmarked man's earlier known crimes were all committed. She also disappeared from a main road, where a struggle would have been noticed, indicating that she most likely got into someone's car willingly, either because she knew them, or perhaps because her killer had told her he was a police officer as well. The pockmarked man was believed to have committed 6 rapes between 1986 and 1994, as well as numerous other attempted attacks. For example, on November 26, 1987, 4 young women between the ages of 14 and 19 reported being approached in their apartment buildings by a man with a tricolor card claiming to be a police officer and demanding to see their identity documents. Luckily, in these 4 cases, the girls either got away on their own or their parent or some other trusted adult unexpectedly arrived to assist them. The incidents all occurred right after each other, with 2 of them occurring within the same building, as though the man spontaneously tried approaching victims of opportunity after each failed attempt to gain control over a girl. The incidents were either suspicious or upsetting enough for all of the girls to report them to the authorities. The 4 girls, as well as 5 adults who interacted with the man, identified him as the man pictured in a composite image of the man who raped Marianne just a month earlier, tying the pockmarked man to these incidents. Several of the adults who had interacted with this man speculated that he was only pretending to be a police officer, as, despite the identification card he flashed, he did not seem to have the confidence or composure of an actual police officer. However, as years went on without the pockmarked man being identified, investigators became more and more convinced that his claims of being a member of law enforcement were not just part of a ruse. Certain details did point to the pockmarked man being either a police officer or a gendarme, a member of France's military police. Some circumstances seemed to make the latter possibility the more likely, such as his vocabulary, the types of knots he tied, and the tactics he used, as well as the proximity of gendarmerie facilities to some of his crimes. He also seemed to have some sense of forensics, making some attempts to prevent leaving behind DNA before the average member of the public would have understood its forensic value, and wiping down items at crime scenes that would have had his fingerprints. He was obviously not always successful in removing all of the forensic evidence, but the absence of such evidence at some crime scenes has prevented them from conclusively being tied to him. The possibility that the pockmarked man truly had been a gendarme led to an investigating magistrate opening a massive effort to search for the killer amongst their ranks. In 2021, 750 men who had been gendarmes in the Paris region at the time of the crimes were ordered to report for questioning and to provide a DNA sample. Farov learned he had been ordered to report through his wife, who used his old cell phone number. On September 24, 2021, she told him that she had just received a phone call meant to inform her husband that he had to report in 5 days, and instructing him to call back to receive a time for his appointment. She told him that the commander who called said that the summons was in relation to a reopened investigation relating to events that occurred between 1986 and 1992. She would later say that she noticed no change in his mood or behavior when he received this news. He left home 3 days later and was found dead of a suicide by overdose on the day he was due to report for questioning. Verov served as a gendarme stationed in the cavalry of the Republican Guard between 1983 and 1988. He went on to become a member of the police force until a motorcycle accident forced him into early retirement in 2014. Between 1993 and 2000, he lived in Longperrier, a 15-minute drive from the site of Ingrid's abduction and a 30-minute drive from where Karine Leroy went missing. According to Verov's wife, who had been married to him since 1985, they had a harmonious marriage, and her husband never got angry. His identification as the pockmarked man also shocked his neighbors, who described him as a helpful, normal neighbor. He has been described as a typical police officer who acted professionally and had a good sense of humor. However, he did have mental health struggles in the later half of the 1990s, which required him to take time off and seek treatment. The second suicide note, which was addressed to Verov's wife, has not been released to the public in full. It has been reported that he did not provide details about the crimes which he acknowledged committing. He blamed his crimes on impulses that stemmed from events in his childhood, and claimed that his wife and children were the reason he gained control over them and stopped killing. He claimed to have committed suicide to protect his family, knowing that his crimes were about to become public. It has also been reported that Verov claimed to have committed no crimes after 1997 in the letter. This is concerning because the last crime attributed to the pockmarked man occurred in 1994. Investigators are currently looking into more than 20 crimes, trying to ascertain if Verov had any involvement in them.